Perfect. Right. For posterity purposes. All right. All right. Well, we're going to get started here and diving in, like I said, to exploring using Autopilot and Intune to make deploying Windows super easy. We've got John here who's going to walk us through all sorts of demos and trainings. It's going to be a great day. So I'm going to pass it right on over to him to get us started.
All right, thanks, Kate. So this is Windows Made Simple with Autopilot and Intune. The agenda today is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to talk about Autopilot, how that can be used for deploying your devices, Intune, how you can use that to kind of supplement Autopilot and then be used to enable the ongoing management of your devices. We'll do lots of demos, and then there'll be some time at the end for Q&A. As Kate mentioned, I'm John Anderson. I'm a senior systems consultant here at Trafera. I've got 15 plus years of experience doing consulting, specifically around Microsoft services and products, and more specifically with Microsoft management and security tools that are kind of focused on identity and device management and security. And before we jump into the main presentation too, I'll point out we do have a professional services department at Trafera, which I'm a part of. So if you see anything in this presentation that you'd like to have a more in-depth discussion about, maybe even get some assistance with, a health check, things like that, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. So jumping into the presentation here, I want to start by talking about Autopilot, which is Microsoft's tool for doing modern deployment of Windows devices. And when we talk about deploying Windows devices, there's kind of two main ways to deploy Windows devices. The first one is traditional Windows deployment, which many of you will be familiar with. This is kind of the method that's been used for many years, where you would build a custom image that contains all of the things you need for a production-ready device. So you would start with the base operating system and updates, drivers, your apps and packages, applying your settings, security policies, OS customizations, all that. And that all gets packaged up into a thick image or a task sequence or something of the like. That is then deployed to new computers that you've bought from the manufacturer. And it wipes out what comes on that device, right? You wipe out the image that comes from the manufacturer and put down your own custom image. And this has worked well, though it can be quite expensive from a time perspective. It takes a lot of administrative time to initially build the image and then a lot of administrative time to maintain that image over time. So what Autopilot helps to enable is modern Windows deployment. With this method, we move away from those thick images and instead just use what comes on the device from the manufacturer. And we instead provision the device instead of deploying it. So in this case, the device would connect to the Microsoft Cloud via Autopilot and then install apps and packages and customizations that we've built in Intune during that deployment. And then the device is ready for the end user. And this cuts out needing to install an OS and patch it and install a bunch of drivers. A lot of that stuff is just taken care of by the OS that's on the system. So what does that process look like at a high level? So first you would buy a new device from a manufacturer, maybe say you bought a new device from Trafera. We at Trafera would get that device in and collect the device ID information and upload it to Autopilot on your behalf. You would then, on your end, sign into Intune and create an Autopilot deployment profile and all the other supporting objects in Intune, applications, packages, policies, that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, we would, at Trafera, then ship those devices either to you or even directly to the end user. And when you unbox those devices, since they've been registered with Autopilot, they'll connect to the internet, see that, and start the Autopilot deployment process, which will then cause them to get all the things that you've deployed from Intune. So what does that actually look like in practice? And I've got a little video of that here. So this is simulating a new out-of-the-box device booting up for the first time that has already been registered with Autopilot. So instead of booting up to the normal out-of-box that you would expect to see, it boots up to this branded screen for my Contoso demo tenant, asking me to sign in with my credentials. It supports multi-factor authentication during this process. And then at this point, it goes through and starts actually setting up the device. It joins it to Entra, it joins it to Intune, gets it, all enrolled for management. It starts applying security policies, applications, certificates, Wi-Fi profiles, just all the kind of different things that you might need to have a production-ready device. And this process can vary on how long it takes, mostly depending on how many applications you have deployed. I've sped it up in this case here, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. So this process finishes up. And then we get to the Windows sign-on screen. So then at this point, the user can sign into the device. And then now there's some additional Autopilot set up. This is the first part was the device phase of Autopilot, and the second part is the user phase of Autopilot. So the user is once again here prompted for multi-factor, and then the user phase of Autopilot finishes before finally letting the user into their desktop to start working. Should see that in just a moment here. And there we go at the desktop. So that's what the Autopilot deployment looks like. Go back to the slide deck here. So how do we actually get those devices registered in Autopilot? Like I mentioned, when you buy a new device, you could have the vendor upload it for you. So say Trafera, upload the device record. But what if you have devices on site right now that you need to get uploaded? Well, there's also a few ways to take care of that. If we go out to the Intune portal here, go to devices, enrollment, and then under Autopilot down here, you have your devices list. So here's where the devices show up. We need to get devices in here. And there's a couple ways to do that. I've got a demo video here. So if you have a device that's at the out-of-box screen, what you can do is hit Shift F10 and it'll pop up a command prompt. And then you can type PowerShell to get a PowerShell prompt. And then we want to install a script. In this case, I'm installing a script called get Windows Autopilot info. This will install this script from the Microsoft PowerShell gallery. It's a script written by Microsoft. You can then run the script with the -online parameter. And what it'll do is collect the hardware information off the device and then connect to your Intune tenant via the Microsoft Graph API and upload the hardware information for you. And again, you would only need to do this on devices that you weren't able to get pre-enrolled by the vendor when you ordered them. So we see that goes through and then it's imported. So once that completes, that device then shows up in this list. If you wanted to manually collect that information off your devices, maybe you have a different systems management tool, you can also do it from the command line manually. So if you run a command here to get the WMI instance or CIM instance for Win32 BIOS serial number, that gets you the serial number of the device. And then the same type of command, but for this device hardware data property, that gets you the hardware hash. You could then take that and put it in a CSV file, and out in the Intune portal here, use the import button to upload that CSV file. Finally, if you have Configuration Manager currently, Configuration Manager also collects this data. So if you go into the Resource Explorer to look at the hardware inventory data, you'll see this device information property that contains the hardware hash. So since you have that, you can actually make a query around it. And I've got a demo query here where I'm just looking at the serial number and hardware hash. So I could run that, collect all the information, and then I could again export this to a CSV file and go upload it to Intune. So those are kind of all the ways to get the devices actually into the devices list out in Intune here. Actually, no, not there. There we go. So once you have the device in here, the other piece that needs to be in place for the Autopilot deployment to actually run is that it needs a profile assigned. So if we go back and look at what is an Autopilot deployment profile, it's the object that tells the device how to actually go through the Autopilot process. There's a bunch of settings in it, but some of the more important ones are the deployment mode. You can have Autopilot deploy for a single user device, which would be kind of more of like a one-to-one, there's a single user primarily using it, or a shared device, which would be more like a lab computer, conference room, kiosk, digital signage, those types of things. There's also the join type, if you want the device to be joined only to the cloud, just with Entra join, or hybrid join, where it's still joined your on-prem Active Directory as well as the cloud. There's also some ability to do basic device naming as part of the profile. And then probably the main important thing in the profile for deployment ease is the pre-provisioning option. So if you remember back to the video I just showed you, that shows the demo of the Autopilot deployment process. The first thing that happened after booting the system up was the user was asked to sign into their account before the deployment process started. And that's how a user-driven deployment works. With pre-provisioning, we can actually skip that user sign-on screen initially. So this would be intended to be run by like the vendor or maybe by you, the tech person, before giving it out to the end user. But you would skip that sign-in, and then the device would pre-install all of the things that are targeted at the device. And then at that point, you would shut the device back down. And now when you give it to the end user, they're again prompted to sign in on first boot up, but all the device stuff is done. So they get into their desktop and can start working much more quickly. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like. So out in Intune here, again, under devices, enrollment, down at the bottom under Autopilot, we have deployment profiles. So I've got some created in here already. I'll just create a new one as an example. And you can see here some of the options we were just talking about. There's user-driven or self-deploying. Do note if you select self-deploying, a lot of the options get grayed out because it is Entra joined only. And since there's no user interaction, it automatically hides all the things that would normally require user interaction. With user-driven, you do have the option to show certain pages to the end user, though you'll generally hide most of them. You also do have the option to have the device be hybrid joined in addition to just Entra joined, though there is some additional setup that needs to be done to support a hybrid join scenario. We also have this setting right here, allow pre-provision deployment. And then down at the bottom, we have the ability to do a device name template as well. So for Trafera, maybe I want to start all the devices with TF dash and then serial percent. So that would do the serial number of the device after the TF dash. I could also just have it do random numbers. So you can do some basic naming there. As for the pre-provisioning, I do have a quick video too I want to show of just what that actually looks like. So if we do enable that pre-provisioning, you would again boot the device up for the first time, and it would come up to this screen. But then you can actually hit the Windows key on the keyboard 5 times, and it'll bypass the sign-on screen and go to this provisioning screen. So here you could then select pre-provision with Windows Autopilot and go next, and it'll find your Autopilot deployment profile, make sure that the device is connected to the right tenant and everything. And then you click next. And it starts going through the device setup. And then when that completes, you just shut the device back down. And again, when the user boots it up, they'll go to the normal sign-on process and get the device set up. So back in the deployment profile, then we would want that of pre-provisioning to be on, and we'd just go next after setting up our settings here, and then assign this deployment profile out to a group that contains our Autopilot devices. So that's another good question. How do you create a group that contains Autopilot devices? Because if we've just enrolled this new device record, it's going to show up in Entra just named its serial number, right? It's not going to just have a nice name that we can query off of. Fortunately, Microsoft has a solution for that. If we go to my groups here, I've got this Autopilot all group, which I've made as a dynamic Entra group that has this query on it that will pull in any device that is registered with Autopilot for my tenant. So I could just deploy a profile to this group and just apply the same profile to everything. But I probably don't want to do that either. I maybe want to have a mix of like shared devices or user-driven devices. In that case, we can actually utilize group tags. So if I go back to my devices list here, or enrollment and then autopilot devices, you see there's this group tag column. If I click on a device, I can actually type into that group tag. So maybe I want to type in kiosk, for example. And then I can go back over to my groups. And I've made a group called Autopilot Kiosk. And this is also a dynamic group with a membership rule that looks at any Autopilot registered device where the group tag is equal to kiosk. So then what that enables me to do is back in my Autopilot deployment profiles, I could have, say, my user-driven profile that's assigned out to my all Autopilot devices, but excludes the Autopilot kiosk devices. And then I could have my self-deploying profile assigned to that kiosk devices. So that way those devices aren't getting two profiles assigned and having a conflict. They just nicely go where they need to go. And then because I have those groups, I can now assign other kiosk profiles, applications, things specific to those shared devices to that separate kiosk group. So utilizing the group tag to make dynamic groups can really help with being able to target different apps and settings and configurations at different groups of devices. So at this point, then I would have my devices in here and have a profile, a autopilot profile assigned. So I would be ready to run through autopilot, except for there's a few other just kind of back end settings that you need to do on initial tenant setup. So just to cover those real quick, over in your Entra portal, if you go to devices and device settings, the users that are running through autopilot need to have the ability to join devices to Entra. So you need to make sure this is set to either all or selected, and select groups that contain the users that will be doing autopilot. Similar to that in Intune, under the automatic enrollment option here, you need to also either have the MDM scope set to all or set to some and pointed at groups that contain the users that will be running autopilot. In addition to that, you need to have a couple CNAME records set up in DNS. There's a learn more link here that tells you about the records you need to have in place. And then there's the device platform restriction. That is also very useful. If you click in here, this lets you control which types of devices users are able to enroll into Intune. And it also lets you block enrollment of personally owned devices. So if you don't want users enrolling a device that they just went and picked up off the shelf at Best Buy, I would recommend blocking enrollment of personally owned Windows devices. Okay. So that's kind of all of the base settings that are needed to get an actual autopilot deployment up and running. I don't know, Kate, any questions in the chat yet or anything?
Nope, nothing coming through in the chat.
Okay. Well, we'll move on then. The next thing I want to talk about is troubleshooting autopilot deployments. So chances are once you get autopilot set up, everything's not going to just go perfectly on the first try. If you do need to troubleshoot it, there's a few avenues you can take. First of all, there's a whole bunch of log files generated by Autopilot. You can find some of them just in the file system under Program Data, Microsoft Intune Management Extension, and Logs. And you can find other ones in the event viewer. There's a modern deployment diagnostics provider event log that has a lot of good information. There's also some tools you can use. So there's a script, get autopilot diagnostics community.ps1. This script will go through and evaluate all those event logs and local log files and give you kind of a nice output, a summary of maybe what went wrong on the device. There's also the MDM diagnostics tool, which is a tool just built into the operating system. It'll basically collect all of the logs into a single zip file that you can then, upload or copy somewhere else to take a look at. And there's also some reports out in Intune and a diagnostics page you can actually open up within the autopilot itself. So let's actually take a look at some of those. I've got a video here that we can show right away. So when you have a device running through autopilot, if you press Control-Shift-D, it'll open up the diagnostics page. And this can show you information about the deployment, about the device, maybe about what step it's at, or what step it errored on, the more detailed than what it shows you in the default UI. There's also an export logs button there where you can export a zip file of all the logs. Again, at the device, you could also use Shift F10 to open up a command prompt, and then use PowerShell to install that script I was talking about, the get autopilot diagnostic script. And then when you run that script, there we go. The output gives you information about the deployment, and you get this timeline at the bottom of all the steps that were happening. So if you say had like an application failure, for instance, you would see that listed here at the bottom. So in addition to those, you can also go on this device here. Like I said, run the MDM diagnostics tool. You can run it from the command line, and it'll copy all those log files, like I said, into a zip file. So I just put it on the root of the C drive. And we can see all the different log files it collects, basically everything you'd want to know from the device related to autopilot and deployment. This can also be done just through the GUI. If you go into settings and then accounts, access worker school, and then click this export button, it'll save the logs to the path that it shows here. And then finally, there's the reports out in Intune. So if you go to Intune, devices, and monitor, down at the bottom here, you have a Windows Autopilot deployment status. So this will give you a listing of all of the recent autopilot deployments across the environment, who ran them, how long they took, if they were successful or not. If you click into it, it'll give you some information about if it did have an error. Sometimes it'll show like an error code here. So not super detailed information here, but at least some basic success failure information. And that's kind of, the quick overview of troubleshooting. Of course, you can also find a lot of information online. Microsoft has a lot of good in-depth documentation around troubleshooting as well. So, Google is your friend there for sure. So jumping back into the slide deck then, I also want to talk about autopilot device preparation. So everything we've been talking about so far is kind of the original implementation of autopilot. Autopilot device preparation is a new kind of form of autopilot that was introduced last year. And the main difference is that it's very user-centric. So you'll notice with all the stuff I was already talking about with autopilot, everything's very device-focused, uploading device hashes, getting devices in groups, assigning things to devices. But outside of that, Intune in general is very user-centric. So the idea with this version of Autopilot is you would instead target things at groups of users rather than devices. This newer version of Autopilot only works on Windows 11. It also only works for intra-join devices, so you can't do hybrid devices with this. It does have a new UI, some better reporting built in, and you don't have to register the Autopilot device with the Autopilot database. So let's take a look at what this looks like. We actually have a video here. So again, this is a new device booting up for the first time to the out-of-box experience. In this case, we do have the first few items because they don't get skipped by the old autopilot. We come up to the initial sign-on screen here, and I go ahead and sign in with my account. Again, it supports multi-factor here. And then because I have the new device preparation policy assigned, it sees that and starts going through device setup. Though you'll see the device setup window here is different compared to the other autopilot window. We just kind of have more of a spinning percentage counter here. So it's less descriptive about what's going on, I guess, from this perspective. But that runs through, and then the user is able to, again, sign into their desktop and start working. So out in Intune, if we go back to devices and enrollment, down at the bottom here, you have this device preparation policies section. If you click into that, you can create a device preparation policy. And then it'll ask you some information about the policy. and it wants you to select a device group. So this is a group that the devices will get put into once they are deployed or once they're identified from this deployment. So I actually have a group made for that already. If I go back to my groups list here. So I've got Autopilot device prep devices. The only prerequisite with this group is that you need to modify the owners of the group to include the Intune provisioning client service principal. But once you've done that, you can then specify that group here. So Intune Autopilot device prep devices. Then we go next, we select all the configuration settings. So user-driven, single user, Entra, those are the only options available here currently. The user won't be an administrator. Our out-of-box settings, what does the end user experience look like? Apps that will be installed during Autopilot, scripts that will be installed during Autopilot. And then we would go next and finally assign this out to a group of users that we want to be able to enroll devices in this manner. And then finally create the policy. One thing I will say with that, though, is by default, the devices would then come in marked as personal devices. So if you want to change that and have devices be marked as corporate right from the start, back in your enrollment setting here, there's this corporate device identifiers at the top. You would come in here and upload a CSV file that just contains the make, model, and serial number of your devices. And then those devices would be marked as corporate devices. All right, so that's the Autopilot device prep. And that's kind of the end of our Autopilot section of the presentation. I'm going to now move on to talking about creating and managing the Intune objects. So any questions before we do that, specifically about Autopilot?
There's nothing in the chat, but if anyone, we've got a reasonable enough sized group today. If anyone has a question and would like to raise your hand and just ask it out loud, feel free to do that too.
Okay. So we've seen now deploying devices with Autopilot, but with just what we've had set up, you're going to have a very basic deployment, right? You won't have your apps or configurations or settings or security policies. So that's where Intune comes in to help us build all of that. So I want to just start kind of taking a look at the main things you might want to set up in Intune, and we'll start with applications. So many of you will be familiar with packaging applications through other management tools, and fortunately, packaging apps through Intune is very similar to packaging apps elsewhere. If we go to our list of apps here, we have an option to create apps up at the top. And you can see there's all sorts of different apps we can create across, Android, iOS, lots of Microsoft options. Generally, the ones that you'll end up using most often here, though, are the Windows app Win32 or the Microsoft Store app New. So let's cover the Windows app Win32 first, since that's going to be most similar to what you may have done in the past. And when we go in here, we see the first thing it's asking us for is an app package file. And if we browse, it's looking for a .intune win file. So how do we get that? So the process of packaging a Win32 app in Intune actually starts at the application source. So much like you would normally do, we're going to package an app. We need to download the installer for it. So in this case, VLC Media Player. We need to figure out a silent install and detection method for it. So I've got an install batch file here, an uninstall batch file. I've got my detection method script that's looking for a registry key. Basically, I've got everything I need here to, to package the app. We can't upload this content just like it is to Intune. We first have to get it zipped up. So that's where this Intune Win app util comes from. You can actually just find this out online on Microsoft's GitHub. They have the Microsoft Win32 content prep tool, and you can just download it right from here. So I have it downloaded locally already. I'm just going to go ahead and run it. And oh, it's going to have a problem apparently. Go make sure we have. Oh yeah, they did just update this 2 weeks ago. I wonder if the new version has an issue. Do some live troubleshooting here. Yeah, cannot run latest breaking change. Okay. Well, good. It looks like Microsoft broke the tool. So let's go maybe download the previous version of the tool. Yeah, let's go back just to this one. That one runs correctly. Okay. So once you have a working version of the tool, you would download it and run it. And then the first thing it's asking is point at the source folder that contains the files. So I browse to my VLC media player folder here. And then I need to specify the setup file. So in this case, I'm running an install batch file. So I'm going to specify that. And then the output folder, where do I want it to put the zipped up content? So I've just got a packages folder here that I'll put it in. And then no, I don't want to create a catalog folder. And there we go. Now we have our install VLC.intune win file. So now I can go back out to Intune. And I'm in my Win32 app creation. I can browse for that Intune win file I just created. So then from here, we need to specify some information about the app. So I'll call it just VLC media player. You can optionally fill in a bunch of this other information. It's not required, but it can make the app look nice. Maybe one thing you want to add is like a logo so that if you're deploying this through like the company portal, it'll look nice for your end users. We need to then specify the install command and uninstall command. So again, in this case, I was using batch files. So I'm just going to specify those here. I can specify an installation timeout. I can say if it's going to install for system or user, determine the behavior of the restart based on return codes. I can set requirements. I can say maybe this can only install on 64-bit systems because it's the 64-bit version of the installer. It has to be at least, say, Windows 10 22H2. I could also add custom requirement scripts here if I had other things I wanted to check. I have to detect if it's installed. I can manually configure that by browsing for, say, an MSI product code, looking for like a file and folder path, looking for a registry key. In this case, I actually have a detection script that I want to upload. That's searching the registry dynamically for the version and name of the software that I'm installing. We can set up dependencies. So if there's another app that we have built that needs to install prior to this app, we can make that dependency chain here. We can also set up supersedence. So if we had a previous version of VLC that we were replacing with this new version, we could set this new version to supersede the old one. And finally, we have assignments. So we can deploy out the VLC application either as required, where it'll automatically install for users or devices. We can make it available, where it'll show up in the company portal as an optional install. Or we can deploy the uninstall, where it will automatically remove it from the system. I'll just leave it unassigned for right now. And create. So then when we create, it actually builds the app, and then we'll see up here, it uploads that Intune win file. And once that Intune win file is uploaded, we don't need to keep it around locally anymore if you don't want to save some space. Though I would recommend keeping a local copy of the source files, because once that Intune win file is uploaded, it's hard to reverse engineer it and get the files back out of it. It's possible, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. So that's building VLC Media Player as a Win32 app. Like I mentioned, the other option you might want to use in here is the Microsoft Store app new. So with this option, we're actually installing an app just from the store or from WinGet. So if I search here just for VLC, I can see there's a couple options, a UWP version of VLC and a Win32 version of VLC. So maybe I want to still do the Win32 version. I'll select that. It populates all the information here for me. I can modify it if I want. Maybe I want to call it again. Yeah. And then I go next, and I'm already at the assignment screen. It has figured out all of the content management, silent installs, detection, all that's taken care of automatically. So now I create, and I've got my VLC Media Player Win32 app and my VLC Media Player Store app. So you can see it's much easier to create the Store app. So I would definitely say, check that out if you have apps that are supported through the Store app deployment. And just to kind of show you more detail about where that's coming from on the back end, it's using this winget feature. So if we do winget search VLC, we see a bunch of those VLC packages. I could then also do like winget install and specify the specific package I want, and it would install it as well. So that's kind of what's happening on the back end. The last thing to mention with apps is you will find, if you're searching around for tutorials and whatnot online, people recommending using the line of business app if you have just like a basic MSI to deploy. I will say if you're going to be deploying apps through Autopilot, I would recommend not mixing line of business apps and Win32 apps, as they can conflict with each other and try to install software at the same time, which can cause you problems. So for apps that you're deploying through Autopilot, I would use just either and or Win32 and Store App New. Both of those work fine with each other. Okay, so that's applications. The next thing I want to talk about then is under devices, we have configuration. So this is where we can create all of our policies that would apply to devices. So if we go to create a policy here, we've got a few options. There's a settings catalog, a properties catalog, and templates. Templates can be useful for specific situations. So say you wanted to build a kiosk profile. There's a kiosk profile pre-built in here. Or you need to deploy certificates. There's some pre-built certificate profiles. Same thing with VPN and Wi-Fi. So if you're doing one of the specific things that there is a template for, using a template can be a good idea. But in general, you're going to do settings catalog for most things. So if we select the settings catalog here, maybe I want to make a new policy for office updates. I go in here and I can click add settings, and I get the settings picker. And this will have pretty much all the settings you're used to seeing from group policy, or a majority of them anyways. You've got things like your administrative templates in here with your Windows components and kind of all the things you're used to seeing. You can also search for specific settings up at the top, and it'll narrow the list down. In this case, we wanted to do office updates. So I'm going to scroll down to Microsoft Office here, and then updates. And then I can see all the settings down below here. Maybe I want to enable automatic updates, and I want to set the update channel. So you can see those get added over here. I could, enable the channel, maybe set that to monthly enterprise, turn on automatic updates, and then go next. And I could then assign this out to users or devices in my environment. Once it's created, just like a group policy, you can also come back in and edit it, add more settings, remove existing settings. Very versatile, very similar to group policy, just kind of out in the cloud here. The nice thing, though, about this compared to group policy is when you actually assign these to devices, you can go into your device and see a listing of all the policies that are assigned to your device and if they've successfully applied or not. So I can even click into a policy here and see all the different settings within that policy that I've assigned. So it's a lot easier just kind of from a single pane of glass to see what's applying to devices and what has succeeded or failed when trying to apply. Back in the configuration section here, so you do have this ability to create all these policies, but maybe you have a lot of existing on-prem group policy that you want to get in here, and it's kind of daunting to go through and manually recreate all of it. Fortunately, Microsoft did create this group policy analytics tool out in Intune as well. So what you can do here is go export a group policy report from your on-prem group policy, and then in here we can import. And if we just go grab here, I've got a group policy report that I exported earlier. we import that in here, it'll analyze the group policy object and try to match the on-prem group policy settings to settings in Intune. If I click on the MDM support here, I can see the settings it was able to automatically match and the settings it wasn't able to automatically match. And just because it says it couldn't automatically match a setting in here doesn't necessarily mean the setting doesn't exist in Intune. It just couldn't automatically match it. So you might just have to do a little extra searching there. But we could have this make a policy for us. So I could say migrate up at the top here. And then maybe I just want to select all of the settings that are compatible. So I just do the select all here and then go next. And we can see the settings that have been selected. And then it asks me some information about what do I want the new profile to be called. So I'll just call it import example. We can assign our scope tags. We can again assign it out to devices or users and then deploy. So now you can see in my configuration, it created a new settings catalog object called import example. And if I click into that, you can see it created the policy with all of the different settings that I told it to import. So the group policy analytics can really help with speeding up the import or the migration from on-prem group policy to Intune. Though I would say, don't just blindly import your objects from group policy to Intune. This is a great opportunity to clean up, probably the year's worth of group policy bloat that builds up. But definitely a useful tool still. Let's see, the other thing that you can do in configuration policies here that I mentioned was the properties catalog. This isn't actually for setting any settings. This is just for collecting settings. So you'd create a properties catalog and you would just say inventory all of these different settings from my devices. And I actually already have one built, so it doesn't show anything there. Yeah, down here. So I'm telling devices to inventory information about CPU, disk drive, network adapter, OS version, and then this will all be, queryable or viewable on your device objects. So that's what the properties catalog is. Continuing on with settings, so we can create pretty much any setting here in the configuration node, but there is also an Intune on the left side here, this endpoint security node. And this is for creating the same type of configuration profiles, but more tailored to the specific thing that is mentioned here. So I would say if a setting exists here in endpoint security, like antivirus or disk encryption, you should create the setting here, not in the main configuration section. If the setting doesn't exist here, then yes, you can come back to devices and configuration and create it here. But endpoint security should be the first stop for anything endpoint security related. So things like your antivirus, firewall, the more advanced Defender features like attack surface reduction rules, app control policies, all that kind of stuff. And then anything that you can't create via one of the settings catalogs or settings areas that's built into Intune, we could maybe instead take care of with a script. So there's this scripts and remediation section, and there's kind of two tabs up at the top here. So platform scripts are more of like run once jobs. So an example one I have in here is removing pre-installed vendor software. Maybe during Autopilot, I want this script to run and uninstall a bunch of the stuff the vendor has preloaded on the system. And then it'll just run that one time and not run again. Whereas a remediation is something I could deploy out and have it run every day, every week, maybe even every hour on devices. I've got an example one in here for backing up BitLocker recovery keys. So sometimes when you have hybrid devices, the keys are slow to back up. So I've got a policy here that will look at the event log on the system. And if it doesn't see an event for successfully backing up a BitLocker recovery key, it'll run a remediation script to force that key back up. So you can basically do anything with a system level PowerShell script, but I would generally try to do my configuration through the configuration node before reverting to a script if possible. The last thing I'll say about policies is if you go to your devices here, there's also this policy sets where you can actually create a set of policy objects to target at devices. So I could even add apps to this. But if I add device configurations, maybe I want to, add all these different device configurations to this policy set. So now when I, need to, maybe I've got 15 different policies I want to deploy to a group of devices. Instead of having to do 15 separate assignments, I can add them all to this one policy set and then just assign the policy set to the group. So it makes managing the assignments a bit more convenient. Okay, so then that's it for kind of base configuration. The next thing I want to talk about is Windows updates, which is also configuration, but it has its separate section here. So Windows updates utilizes Windows Update for Business, which is just Microsoft's cloud-based updating service. And we've got options in here where we can set up update rings to configure those Windows Update for Business settings. So if I click into a update ring here, you can see the settings that are configurable. We can say, allow Microsoft updates, but also maybe allow driver updates and firmware updates. We have the ability to defer updates. So maybe an update comes out on patch Tuesday, but I don't want my devices to install it right away on patch Tuesday. I could put a 2-day deferral in here, and now my devices won't see that update until 2 days after patch Tuesday, so the Thursday. I can also have down at the bottom here deadline settings. So I can say when a device does see that update on that Thursday after patch Tuesday, wait 0 days to install it. So just install it immediately. I could, make this a higher number if I wanted it to be available for a longer period of time. And then I also have a grace period. So once the update has installed and it requires a reboot, give the device 1 day to reboot before the reboot is forced. There's also settings in here for controlling how the update notifications look, if it should auto install and restart, what time of day your active hours are at. And then once you actually have the policy deployed, you have some options up at the top here as well, where you could pause updates. So if you noticed a problem going on with an update going out in your environment, you could come in here and temporarily pause updating for your devices. If there was a really bad update that installed, you could even come in here and tell devices to uninstall the most recent feature or quality update they installed. So you do get some pretty good controls with the Windows Update settings. In addition to the base update rings policy, there's also feature update policies. So this is where you can send out feature updates either as optional or required, and tell devices this is the feature update level you should go to. So in this case, I'd be telling devices to require the Windows 11 24H2 feature update. So they'll just update all the way to 24H2. But then say this fall, maybe 25H2 comes out, my devices will stay on 24H2 until I come in here and create a policy telling them that they can go to 25H2. So it lets you kind of control your feature update deployment. There's also driver updates here, where I can tell devices to automatically install driver and firmware updates. And then I could click into this, and my demo environment's just VMs, so it doesn't have anything in here, but you'd have a big list of all the driver and firmware updates that are being deployed out to your environment. And you could, individually approve or deny those driver updates if you wanted to be really granular about it. Finally, there's also a report. So over in the Azure portal, if you just search for monitor and then go into workbooks, and down at the bottom, the Windows Update for Business report, you have this report that collects telemetry data from all your devices and tells you, if your devices are on the latest security update, the latest feature update. I can get more detailed information about your monthly security update deployments or feature update deployments. You can even get information about driver update deployments and even delivery optimization usage. So you can kind of get network usage information, how hardly are things hitting your internet pipe, how much file peer-to-peer sharing are they doing. So a lot of great information here. And all you have to do is just have your devices enrolled with Intune and have basic Windows telemetry enabled. And then it'll send a copy of that telemetry data to this report. I will say one note for this report is that it does use log analytics behind the scenes, which normally costs money. So you do have to have a pay-as-you-go subscription set up in Azure, though this specific report is exempted from any cost. So even though you need to have a subscription, you won't be charged anything for using this report. So minimize out of there. And that's kind of the main thing. So we've got Autopilot, we've got our apps built to install, we've got all of our configuration profiles to configure OS settings and security and customizations. We've got our scripts to do anything that we can't do with configurations. And then we've got our Windows update policies to keep the device up to date and patched and on the latest version. There's, of course, more stuff we can do in here in Intune with compliance policies and more in-depth reporting and some more advanced features, but that's, kind of getting beyond the scope of today's call. So if we go back to the presentation, I think that was the end of it. Yeah, so questions or comments? We've got about 8 minutes left here.
Yeah, no questions in the chat, but Chris, you are very welcome. He said, thanks, John. Well, he said Kate me, but it was all John. We can all admit that. All right. Yeah, that is all for today. I have a couple quick notes. I am going to launch the exit survey. If you are new to the Trifera coffee and convo setup, we love to give people little $5 Starbucks gift card as a thank you for joining us for these sessions and trainings. So if you take that exit survey, if someone could just give me a thumbs up that they see it, that would be great. If you take that exit survey, it lets us know that you are interested in grabbing that coffee gift card. We'll send that to you within the next couple days. I also wanted to mention a huge thank you to our partners, HP. They are partnering with us for this session today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Trifera is an amplified power partner and authorized services provider for HP. So we're able to get our customers great products, prices, services, support for HP products. So if you ever need anything HP, come to us. We would love to help you with that project. And then lastly, if you want to access this training again, share it with peers, share it with other people, or just need to kind of reference it and get a reminder or a refresh, we do put all of our trainings on our YouTube channel, and that's pretty easy to find. Just search Trifera in YouTube and you'll be able to find all of our sessions, this one and all previous ones. So we cover a wide range of different trainings in there. So check it out. But that is all today. Thank you, John, so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We can't wait to see you next time. Keep an eye on our event calendar for what's coming up. But have a great rest of your week.